I love The Fall, right. Yes, the late 70s English post-punk band is great too, but clearly I'm referring to the season, you know. Autumn, sweater weather, football, pumpkin pie. My favorite time to pop on a Lovecraft audiobook, grab a coffee, and wander through the woods before the sun comes up. October is the best movie watching month, but there's one very special September tradition I've adopted over the years, and that's to watch The Trouble with Harry.
Well, let's get Harry and pop him in.
I don't think it's appropriate to call any of Hitchcock's films underrated. Some of his lesser-known UK flicks are often overlooked, sure, and the final two he directed are divisive, but overall, I'd say his entire catalog is pretty damn perfect.
What a grave insult.
The Trouble with Harry landed in 1955, slap dab in the middle of what I think most consider to be Hitch's peak. Rear Window dropped the year before, and by the time the decade was through, he'd go on to release some of cinema's most memorable classics. 56, The Man Who Knew Too Much, a remake of a 20-year-old film that he himself created. I prefer the original, thanks for asking, but the James Stewart Grace Kelly picture is definitely better known, if not for the Ki Sara Sara song it introduced, unfortunately.
What will be, will be.
Then we got The Wrong Man that same year, followed by Vertigo in 58, the one that most consider to be his masterpiece. Hell, I think it actually beat out Citizen Kane as the best movie of all time recently. Okay, so Hitchcock was a genius and still my favorite director, but let's not go crazy here. Citizen Kane is still Citizen Kane. 1959, North by Northwest, and Psycho introduced the 60s with a bang, or rather a stab or two. My long and winding point is that I don't think The Trouble with Harry gets nearly enough credit.
The last of Harry.
It's tonally much different than anything the Hitch had done, or would go on to do for the rest of his career. It's a comedy starring a bunch of nobodies at the time, and it has now fallen into public domain. A perfect way to introduce this new series that I've cleverly called FreeView, because it's a free film for all of you to view.
You're beautiful. Wonderful. You're the most wonderful, beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'd like to paint you.
I'm not trying to convince you that this is one of Hitchcock's masterpieces, but this concise little romp does showcase all of his skills very well. The establishing shots are beautiful. There's a quaintness to this idyllic Vermont town. Robert Burks' cinematography is as splendid as always. His work alone deserves an enormous amount of credit. The Trouble with Harry looks like autumn all the time, and there are certain shots that rival some of his best pieces of work with the iconic director. Rear Window is still his magnum opus as far as I'm concerned, but this was an artist at the peak of his career. Very rarely do cinematographers get the credit they deserve, and if we're talking pure, inspired ingenuity, this man needs to be commended for his work here. Everything has a fairy tale fall fantasy look to it, similar to Pooh's 100-Acre Wood, without all of the addiction and depression.
I'll learn to live without it.
The majority of the scenes take place on sets, which could have been distracting if the dialogue wasn't so great. If we're following Hitchcock's trajectory, it's abundantly clear that he was beginning to settle with a few actors during this era. James Stewart, Cary Grant. Here, we see him experimenting a bit with players who weren't as famous. They are just cattle after all.
I've always said that actors are cattle, actually. But at least the birds do as they're told.
This was Shirley MacLaine's theatrical debut, and John Forsythe was mostly known for television at the time. Edmund Gwynn was definitely the best known of the bunch, mostly recognizable as jolly old St. Kringle in the 1947 film Miracle on 34th Street, but I'd say his performance here as the sad old Captain Albert Wiles is far more impactful.
With the looks of it, you won't get back for Christmas.
Less cute, even if he is playing an adorable old man here as well. That's the thing with this flick.
Is your lemonade sweet enough?
There are moments of sweetness, but at the end of the literal day we the audience are privy to, none of these people are really that good.
Let's get back to our little problem. Harry, what's going to become of him?
Oh, no, don't you worry about Harry. He'll be comfortably underground before nightfall.
The beautiful setting, the quiet townsfolk, everything looks peaceful, but there's a bit of a Twin Peaks thing going on here when it comes to the titular character, Harry. Who is he? What did he do? Why are we burying his body so callously, only to dig it up again over and over? The events that take place over this singular day would be repulsive if they weren't so utterly absurd. Our main players, a company of 4, fall for each other, 2 by 2. Admittedly, my only issue with this film is that Gwen's character is so much older than his love interest. It's jarring, but I can't imagine anyone else in either role, so it's a forgivable distraction. Mildred Natwick plays Miss Ivy Gravely so perfectly here, specifically in this one scene where she bears her soul to what is, again, a room full of strangers. She removes a bow, fusses with it, innocence lost. There's so much going on here visually. The subject matter isn't particularly funny, but the way things are shot and the dry delivery of the dialogue is entertaining enough. This is accompanied by Bernard Herrmann's playful score, the first soundtrack he'd do in a long line of collaborations with the director. There's a lighthearted whimsy to the music that works very well with the darker subject matter. Just think It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or Curb Your Enthusiasm. The jaunty tunes juxtaposed with the morbid subject matter is rather facetious, but it adds so much, especially with the tune our main man performs on his way into town. I'll take this over Ray Evans's Ki Sera Sera any day. Now, a special mention has to go out to the supporting cast. Mildred Donnock plays Mrs. Wiggs. Donnock, or Wiggy, as our artistic tramp playfully calls her, Mildred. That's a name we don't hear anymore. There are 2 Mildreds here. Mildred.
Wiggy, you haven't sold a painting.
Her son, the acting deputy in town, is a bumbling doofus, and the closest thing we have to an antagonist. There's something a bit miserable about him that makes me almost want him to win. The tension in the very few scenes he contributes to is palpable.
I understand you made kind of a fool out of me, but I still got enough evidence to know something funny's going on around here.
Shirley MacLaine's son, played by the Beeves, is the antithesis to every cute kid character in films from the era. He rarely, if ever, mugs at the camera, and the way he reacts to death is morbidly hilarious. There's a McCulkin-like good son vibe going on here with him that's eerily unsettling, but the Mac has the Beeves beat as an adult who wears bunny ears publicly to promote his private little empire called Bunny Ears. Beeves is sort of the linchpin. There's an entire sequence of events that drives the narrative and foreshadows the ending involving a dead rabbit, which is a real highlight of the film for me.
Arnie, what are you carrying there?
A rabbit.
Rabbit?
Finally, there's the absent-minded doctor, whose efficiency should be questioned. He's introduced very early on in a few pratfall scenes and wisely peppered throughout the remainder of the film. Goofy things occur in The Trouble with Harry, but I wouldn't call it an inherently silly flick, so it was wise of them to use the Doctor sparingly. One of those too much of a good thing kind of deals. He's by far my favorite character though, performed wonderfully by Dwight Marfield, perhaps the most unknown actor of them all. Now, there are a few others peppered throughout, but I'm trying to keep these free views brief, and digging into their characters might spoil a bit too much. This is a dialogue-driven film, so exploring the characters any deeper would ruin the many surprises it has to offer. It's free in its entirety on YouTube, hence the title of this video, and clearly I can't recommend it enough. A Blu-ray exists at a reasonable price, but unfortunately the quality isn't all that great. Purchasing physical copies of Hitchcock films is a mixed bag. Some of his bigger hits like Rear Window, North by Northwest, and of course Vertigo look great with remarkably preserved visuals, while others appear to have been crudely copied from DVDs. Unfortunately, this is one of the few in the latter category, along with Rope and Marnie. Alternatively, a recent 4K release is out there getting some decent reviews, but I can't really speak to that. Needless to say, even though I'm mentioning it here anyway, I've become a bit skeptical of these remasters. Spending a few extra bucks on a video game we can play for hours is one thing, but dropping 30 to 50 bucks on a 90-minute film from the mid-50s that may or may not be properly touched up is a whole other kettle of fish. Hitchcock flicks are my thing, but how many times do we need to update our collections? VHS, DVD, Blu-ray. As soon as I've completed my Kubrick, Scorsese, Lynch, and Hitch libraries, there's another format. All I can say is skip the regular Blu-ray of The Trouble with Harry. It's not worth the scratch. Check it out here on YouTube, compression and all. Next time on this channel, back to video games, so stay tuned.
Hey, would you mind getting out of my picture?
Ring, ding, 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 ding.